Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Livingston of Want Leverage Communications, a LinkedIn and public relations consultancy. And I'm back for another installment of PR Patter, my semi-weekly show where I chat with the amazing people from across my public relations and marketing network. If you like what you see today, please go to my website, wantleverage.com, and download our free tip sheet. Make your C-suite stand out on LinkedIn. Well, I'm pretty excited today to have a conversation about creativity, which is, I think, my secret sauce. And I'm very excited to introduce my guest, Jason Keith. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Julie.
So,
Excited to be
so
here.
let me tell you a little bit about him. Jason ignites creativity. As a leading expert in creative strategy and the co-founder of Social Fresh, a premier conference and boutique agency, his mission is to bring consistency to innovation. At Social Fresh, Jason combines his unconventional process with 2 decades of branding and creative leadership experience to drive innovation. And this is a great fact. Over 350 of the Fortune 500 have worked with Social Fresh or engaged in their training initiatives. That's pretty impressive, Jason.
Thank you.
His philosophy centers on creativity as a skill that can be taught and improved by anyone. And his forthcoming book, The Case for More Bad Ideas, I love that, champions his belief that counterintuitive frameworks are vital for breakthrough thinking. And he's going to explain that in a few minutes. So, Jason, again, great to see you. I'm so glad that we connected. And tell us about how do you get people to be more creative? I mean, it's kind of hard to teach, right? Because it's very personal.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated. I've taken I think I've been in creativity and creativity classes and art school. I majored in art in college, and I've been in the agency world forever. Um, and we teach practical skills. We teach writing, we teach painting, but we never really teach creative process. I mean, there's a few exceptions. I think there's a couple great agencies that have their own, unique creative process. I think there's a couple teachers out there that are doing this in different ways. But even the people that are teaching it, there's not really like a textbook for how to be creative or like a known process. It's very personal. If you talk to, 10 different writers about what their personal creative process is, how they brainstorm, how they come up with ideas, you're going to get 10 different answers. So I think it includes so much of our brain and so much of our life that it's hard to put like a blueprint to it. But there are some fundamentals. I mean, in my book, for instance, The Case for More Bad Ideas, I kind of treat it more like a cookbook than like an instruction manual, meaning there's pieces that people will grab that work for them, out of the 10 chapters and kind of 10 core concepts. There's maybe 2 or 3 that someone will really align with that works for them and they'll implement into their creative process. I've seen this kind of teaching creativity over the last 10 to 15 years is what someone grabs from a keynote that I give or from an article that I write is completely different from what someone else will get the best insight from. So yeah, it's very personal. I think it's just testing. And I think more people need to intentionally introduce kind of new concepts into their creative process rather than think they just need to think harder or come up with more ideas in the way that they work today. Just test new things, even like the silly things and the kind of icebreakers that some of us think are a little weird or funny or embarrassing. Some of those things can really stick with your process and improve it over time and actually open doors that you didn't think were possible for how you come up with ideas and how you implement creativity in kind of your day-to-day life.
I'm going to ask you to back up a little bit because I meant to ask you more about your backstory and how you got to found Social Fresh. You said that you were started in art school.
Yeah, so I went from art school to the agency world. I was a designer, creative director, eventually started my own agency and sold it. And then I started Social Fresh back in 2008. This is when social media was just happening. And when I was in the agency world, I was always became the go-to person for social and started working more on strategy and things like that. And there just weren't any events yet back then for businesses on how businesses should use social media and what the kind of creative and innovation opportunities were there. So I did a conference. The conference was a big success. I loved working on it. So we've done 30 plus conferences since then. We've expanded kind of the client side of our business since then. We do a lot of creative strategy, a lot of research, some performance marketing for large brands, growth brands. And along the way, I've really leaned into like creativity always helps brands stand out, even in like the paid side of the house these days. Like algorithms really guide a lot of the audience building and targeting, and have kind of been commoditized. And the only way to stand out is to have a unique idea or to have creative that really doesn't look like everyone else that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, you had a great LinkedIn post recently. I loved it. It was sort of blocks of different B2B ads that you had, and they all kind of look the same. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was a great report out of LinkedIn on B2B kind of branding, and the 6 different companies they put next to each other. I think it was kind of 12 ads. We're all trying to own the color blue basically as their branding. And I think the example is really useful because you put them all next to each other and it looks like the same brand. It all looks like the same branding. It's just the sea of sameness. And I think it's, B2B branding, especially finance, like there's a lot of industries, healthcare that we've worked with where there's kind of a template that people are comfortable with. We've seen it in fashion as well. And there's just a look to the industry that people fall into because they want to look safe and conservative and trusted. And because of that, they look like everyone else and their brand really doesn't have a lot of distinction. So I think teaching brands how to challenge that misconception, how to break out of that without, while retaining trust and that feeling of safety is challenging. But I think, there's a lot more attention being paid to it today than there has in the past.
And there's a big payoff in the end if they can do that.
Yeah.
They become more memorable.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you make a brand more memorable, and what's that process like for you and your clients?
I think today it really aligns with a lot of other trends. So if you look at how AI is impacting marketing, if you look at the trust or lack of trust that consumers have in different platforms and different media, really making things more personal, like owned media, I think has been around forever, and I think is getting more attention today than it ever has. Meaning having your own media properties, whether it's a video podcast like this, or a newsletter, or real media channels. If you look at Robinhood has made acquisitions and founded their own media arm, Sherwood Media, that's really good, becoming a significant kind of digital magazine in the finance space. They're actually breaking real finance news. So I think, making these moves to have own media, making moves to make your content and the way you're communicating with customers more personal. Executives getting more into social, executives starting their own media channels, having kind of this world building attitude where you have, audio and tactile pieces of the brand that are unique. I think I always think of MasterCard, which has their Sonic logo. Anytime you use a MasterCard at like a point of sale machine, it has that same Sonic logo that plays. They play that on their social media videos. They play it on their commercials. That creates like real trust, real uniqueness, real breakthrough in the mind of the consumer, maybe even in a way that they don't fully understand and is subconscious in some ways, right? I think breaking out of just like what do our ads look like, or what is the font choice or the color palette, those are decisions that we've kind of come to terms with and have systems around for a few decades now. But thinking more broadly about how you're coming into contact with consumer, how much time you get to spend with the consumer, and the audiences you're trying to connect with. There's a lot of decisions there, and when we first meet with clients, they think we're going to be there to help their ads look better or to help their social media creative look better. And we are to an extent, but we typically ask them a lot of questions and we do a lot of research that they don't expect. We get deeper into their customer journey. We, actually use all their apps and website forms and try to buy their product and all of these things. We ask them about, the sounds and the tactile nature of their business, even though if they're an app, and that exploration is something a lot of brands aren't doing. They're not really fully exploring what it means to kind of stand out in the mind of their audience.
That's really cool. Because brands should have a three-dimensional quality to them, they should have all that's the sensory experience for the customer for sure. So how do you awaken creativity? What do you suggest? I know that I love the title of your book about bad ideas. Why are they a conduit to creativity?
Yeah, bad ideas is a shortcut. So I mean, the book is full of kind of counterintuitive ideas. I think, excuse me, bad ideas is one of my favorites because I think it's one of the real shortcuts in creativity. And the simplest of it is I have a bad idea method I recommend people, like if you're sitting down and you're kind of doing like a self brainstorm, whether you're writing a blog post or an email, or you're writing a novel, or you're coming up with ideas for a new brand or a logo, whatever it is. The bad idea method is simply giving yourself a 10-minute timer and coming up with 25 bad ideas. It's much easier to come up with bad ideas. It takes away the pressure. There's really no risk. Like the worst case scenario is you made a really bad idea, which is the point, right? You want these ideas to look silly and bad or obvious or absurd. So that allows your brain to get started in a different way, a way that creates more contrast and more variety of ideas. There's a lot of benefits to it. I go into deep detail into it in the book. But I think another important piece of it is bad ideas are, taking away that pressure that we feel in other circumstances. And it's a little bit harder than people would think. Like it is easier over time, but the first time you try to write bad ideas, like you will try to get over this like perfection mindset that a lot of us have.
Right. You're trying to correct it. Right.
Yeah. You might even be like, well, that's not a bad enough idea. I want to really come up with the best bad idea. Like that thought will come into your head, which is the weirdest place to be. So, you may not get to 25 the first time. 20 of them may be like really boring or weird ideas, or you may get stuck on trying to be perfect. So I think it usually takes people like maybe like 4 or 5 tries until they really get into a rhythm with it. I use it a lot. And that's one little trick. I also just think in general, opening people up to where ideas come from and how they really are coming from all aspects of our life and our expertise and the focus points we decide to kind of think about more often, the questions we kind of like ask of the universe over a longer period of time, that has a high impact on our creative capabilities. And we can get deeper into that. That's like the happy collisions concept. But I think it's just creativity touches so many pieces of our life. So like learning a little bit more about what are the habits we can form that really start to take advantage of that process, that kind of hidden process.
And I love how you add fun into it. I mean, it's kind of a fun, it really is. It's challenging, but it's also kind of a fun and funny process to go through, right? To open up your mind a little bit and change the way you think.
Yeah, you have to have fun with it. I mean, you have to like not take yourself too seriously in order to be able to come up with bad ideas, in order to be able to kind of spread the variety of ideas you come up with. And also, it's just there's a great quote that the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression, meaning you have to find moments of play and joy in your life, because if you don't, it just it's a drag. Without that inspiration piece, you can't really do great work. And I think remembering that's important, and remembering that the sources of inspiration that you can create in your life consistently should be fun, should be interesting, should be something that gets you excited.
What you're saying is reminding me of, do you know Kevin Carroll?
No.
Well, he wrote a book called, I think it's called Your Red Rubber Ball. He was actually a basketball coach, and he now goes around and lectures about creativity, and he calls it the red rubber ball, because kids who get a simple ball could create so many different games out of it and things out of it. It's very clever. You ought to check it out. But yeah, anyway, what are some brands that you've worked with who are doing it right and who are really coming up with some ways to differentiate themselves in a crowded market?
One of our oldest clients is HubSpot. I've worked with them since kind of when they started earlier, and we've done many different things with them over the years. I can't take credit for some of the most recent successes, which I would love to give like a spotlight to. But it's a B2B software company. It's kind of like, they've done some really good fundamental marketing things over the years, inbound marketing as kind of an invention of a term from them. Their blog and their academy are amazing. But recently they've started doing some things that I think a lot of people are noticing that reflect some of these trends. They acquired podcast and newsletter that had a huge audience. They've created their own podcast network. Their CMO, Kip Bodner, has launched a kind of a cornerstone podcast for them that's becoming very popular. So they're investing in that media side really well. I also think they've hired a lot of really talented people to head their brand, community, and social. If you look at their social media tone and execution over the last year, it's very clear that they went from this kind of dry, boring B2B standard playbook to more of like a millennial, Gen Z, willing to post memes, really good copywriting, willingness to kind of go into that first person voice that's more popular on social these days, willing to be a little, cringy in places, at least for B2B space.
Right.
Their brand ads are really good recently. I think they're taking more risk. They're finding the consumer voice more, which most B2B brands are want to do, and missing out on opportunities like that more often. So I think what they have done is really good. I do really like on the creative side. I think Spotify is always a really great example. Nike is always doing some great things. Robinhood, another client of ours we've worked with, they just did a big rebrand that I think is a really great example to look at. And then I'll also mention, definitely not a client, but Lego is always a really interesting brand.
Oh yeah.
And obviously, like if you're Lego or Nike, like these consumer brands, it's much easier, it feels like, to be creative and put unique things out into the world. But one thing Lego did recently on their rebrand, similar to the similar to the MasterCard example, is they got very tactile with their branding, meaning they have motion branding, like how words and things appear on the screen, like how they actually move in the screen or appear, is a block animation, meaning things fit together, even if they're not like looking like a Lego brick. The way they move on a screen is how a Lego brick would move. And I think that's like an amazing detail, something that a lot of people that see their videos or commercials won't pick up on necessarily, but that they will subconsciously see and expect and be able to visually identify, oh, that's something about that ad or that video looks like Lego. And I think those are great examples of people finding new ways to kind of evoke the core of a brand message with some subtle innovations.
I think all of the examples that you just mentioned also hark back to expanding owned media.
A lot of them do. I call it trust content, which is, and I wrote about this maybe like in 2014, and I think it's more relevant than ever, which is content that allows a brand to spend more time or more meaningful moments with their audience, with their ideal audience. Podcasts, newsletters, video series are really at the core of that. But there's a larger universe there, like events, communities, webinars. Like there's other pieces of that I think are important. The largest scaled audience you get are that own media piece, though, where you can spend 30, 60 minutes with an audience. That's a pretty impactful thing, especially if you can do it consistently over a series. I think that's a miss. I think it's taken advantage of less than it should be by a lot of brands, because brands see newsletters and they don't really think those can scale. They see podcasts and they don't really think those can scale. It's mainly because they're not putting in enough work to do that. To be a good podcast, to be a good newsletter, to be a good video series takes a lot of work. I mean, creators are doing it every day, but they're dedicating a lot of hours to that perfection. And most brands are unwilling to make that resource allocation.
So you talk about those those revelatory moments, that they can be engineered. And You called them happy collisions. Can you explain what that is, and how can you make them even more fruitful and regular?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we love creativity stories that are like, overnight success stories, or the apple falling on the head and that tells you what gravity is, right? But typically every creativity story has years of backstory, right? There's expertise, there's life experience, there's all these things. So I try to put an equation to it. Um, Basically, the three-part equation is you have to have you have to have expertise in something. Expertise kind of gives you the magnifying glass or the lens to identify when something is important. You have to have life experience, which is kind of going through the world, increasing the number of inputs that come into your brain so that you can see more connection points, see more potential collisions, which is where ideas come from. Um, and then you have to ask a question. You have to really have a challenge, right? And most of us have like challenges and problems that we come across a lot, or you're working on a big project. Like I'm working on this creativity book for years and years. And my question to the universe is, what are the counterintuitive examples of creativity in the world? And when I start asking that question intentionally, I see examples of it everywhere, right? And I think great writers, great painters, great marketers do this. They ask that question, they have the expertise, and they intentionally are brushing up. Excuse me. They're intentionally brushing up against life in a unique way. They're like living their life to try to have more inputs come in where they can get more ideas, whether it's the media they consume, the people they spend time with, the the hobbies they have in their day to day, the books they read, etc. So like one of my examples I like to point to that is pretty simple of this is Salvador Dali, who most people know Dali's famous painting, The Persistence of Memory. They might not know the name of it, but it's the one with all the melting clocks.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's seen the melting clocks painting. So the idea for that painting came to Dali when he saw a piece of camembert cheese melting in the sun when he was like eating lunch in France. So he sees this melting cheese, and he has expertise. He's been trained to be a painter since he was 10 years old. His life experience is living in France. He's not born there. He's like traveling the world. If you look at Dali's life, it's like sounds like the perfect life, traveling the world and painting and eating great cheese. And his question, his challenge or question to the universe is he was fascinated with the idea of time and kind of dream worlds and some of these higher level questions of science and philosophy. So he's always looking for symbols of that or visuals of that. So he sees this melting cheese, he connects it immediately with like, what if a clock was melting? And that's where the idea comes from. And I think most big ideas, that's what happens. You have this expertise meeting up with your life experience, and being focused by like the thing that you're working on and you're intentionally looking for inspiration or examples of. So, I mean, the ways to improve that, make sure you're investing in at least one thing that you're becoming an expert at. I think most of us already have that, but leaning into that is very useful. Life experience is really the way you can feed aha moments, is actually being intentional with who you're spending time with. Are they positive people in your life? Are they creative? Not everybody has to be like the most creative person in your life, but maybe limiting the people that are kind of more of a negative or downer piece of that equation.
Well, people who inspire you in some way.
Yeah. People that you are fascinated by, that you really get excited about learning about what they're working on, that sort of thing. And being intentional about how you're spending your time, both like the media you consume. It's not necessarily like stop watching TV or stop reading like trashy magazines or something like that, but it's intentionally pushing things into your kind of daily habits that are unique, that are interruptions in what you normally consume.
And you could feel it. You could feel it when it's affecting you positively. I know recently I found myself scrolling way too much on Instagram. You get kind of sucked into it. And I realized that this was, although I do get some really great information and creative inspiration from Instagram, it was a little too much. And so one night I just stopped and I started reading a great book, and I found like, wow, the light bulb went back on,
Yeah.
And I started getting like having a creative burst of sorts.
Oh,
It
it's
was
amazing. I love that.
really, yeah, it was really wonderful. So I'm a person who's very aware of how to get my creativity going. Like if I go to a museum, like in a few days after, things start bubbling up for me.
Yeah. Anything, I mean, traveling.
Traveling does
I,
that. Yeah.
I love fiction, reading fiction books. I think I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in that. Spending time, like you said, spending time with people that inspire you or fascinate you is really important. Going to events, um, learning new things, tactile things. I know I keep using that word. I'm overusing it today, but like actually physically using your hands to
Yeah.
learn something or do something is a little more impactful than like I have a chess game on my phone that I love to play. Um, that's a great like game and gets my brain working and maybe relaxing in different ways.
Yeah.
It's useful, but
I couldn't
actually playing
agree with you
chess in
more.
person maybe has a larger
Yeah.
impact, or kind of molding clay in a pottery class has more impact on how our brain learns and gets inspired. So I
I
mean,
just started getting into collage,
yeah, that's a
especially
great one.
when I do it when I travel, and that's been an amazing experience
Yeah,
too, because it really helps me to remember what I have gone through, what I have experienced on when I'm traveling somewhere.
I love that. Yeah, and you know it's we live in a digital world today, so it's actually a very big interruption to introduce like a physical hobby into your life. But I think it's a worthwhile thing to consider.
I agree. Well, Jason, this has been such a great conversation. I learned a lot, and it has inspired me to do something new that I've been thinking about for a while to spark my own creativity. So thank you for being here. And if people want to get in touch with you, I guess they could go to your LinkedIn or go to socialfresh.com.
Yeah, you could do that. My newsletter is morebadideas.com. My book comes out in the next month or two. The pre-sale will be up. So if you're interested in the book or you're interested in kind of learning more about
Definitely. I
my
can't wait
stuff,
to read it.
yeah, I appreciate it. Morebadideas.com.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here again. And everyone else, please go to my website, wantleverage.com, and download my free